In Regency England, Lady Victoria Blackwood had the perfect life until her husband abandoned her for a younger woman at her own soirée. Now the most sought-after duke in the realm is pursuing her with surprising intensity, drawn not to her beauty, but to her brilliant mind. Will she risk her heart again and embrace an unconventional love, or retreat behind the walls of propriety that once imprisoned her? The clock struck 6 as Lady Victoria stood at her mirror. Her dress was blue like the sky and felt smooth under her fingers. Candles lit the room with a warm glow that made her pearl necklace shine. The necklace was from her mother and her mother's mother before that. Victoria touched it gently, making sure it sat just right at her neck. Perfect, she said to herself. At 32 years old, Victoria knew how to look just right for big parties. She had been Lord Thomas's wife for 10 years now. 10 years of smiles and bows and perfect words at the right times. Outside her window, the sun was setting. The sky turned pink and gold behind the tall trees of Rosewood Hall. This big house had been her home since the day she married Thomas. She knew every room, every painting on the walls, and every crack in the stone steps. Victoria's maid, Jane, walked in with quick, small steps. "My lady, your husband wants you to come down now. The first guests are here." "Thank you, Jane. I'll be right there." Victoria checked her face one more time. Not a hair was out of place in her dark curls. Her skin was clean, and her cheeks had just the right touch of pink. She looked like a painting of the perfect lady. She picked up her fan and gloves. The fan was made of ivory and cost more than what most people made in a year. The gloves were white and so clean they almost glowed. Victoria put them on with care, pulling each finger tight. As she left her room, she could hear music starting in the big hall downstairs. A soft tune from a piano floated up the stairs. Voices mixed with it, laughing and talking as more guests came in. Victoria walked slowly down the big stairs. Her shoes made little tapping sounds on each step. Her back was straight and her head was held high. She had practiced this walk many times. It made people look at her with big eyes. It made them wish they could be like her. At the bottom of the stairs stood Thomas. He was tall with brown hair that had bits of grey at the sides. His clothes were black and fit him just right. He smiled when he saw her, but his eyes looked past her quickly. "Ah, there you are," he said, taking her hand. "Lady Hampshire has been asking for you, and the Duke of Weston just came in with his new wife." Victoria nodded. "I'll go say hello right away." The big room was full of light from 100 candles. Ladies in pretty dresses moved around like butterflies. Men in dark coats stood in small groups talking about money and horses. Servants with trays of small foods and drinks walked between them all. "Lady Victoria," called Lady Hampshire, a round woman with too many feathers in her hair. "What a lovely party. Your flowers are so fresh. Did they come from your garden?" "Yes. Our gardener cut them this morning," Victoria said with a smile. She knew this dance of words. Ask about children, ask about trips, smile at the right times, laugh softly at jokes. As she talked, Victoria felt proud. This big house, these rich friends, the music and food, it was all part of the life she had built. She was Lady Victoria Blackwood, wife of Lord Thomas. People wanted to be her friend. They wanted to come to her parties. They wanted to dress like her. 10 years ago, she was just Victoria Smith, the daughter of a man with some money but no fancy name. Now she was at the top of London life. She'd climbed up, and now she was here, where the air was sweet and everything shined. From across the room, Thomas caught her eye. He stood by the door, greeting someone new. It was the Marquess of Westmoreland and his daughter. The girl looked young, maybe 20 years old. She had yellow hair that fell in soft waves and a pink dress that made her look like a rose. Her eyes were big and blue, and her smile showed small white teeth. Something cold touched Victoria's heart as she watched Thomas bow low over the girl's hand. He held it too long. He smiled too wide. His eyes stayed on the girl's face like he was seeing the sun for the first time. "Are you well, Lady Victoria?" asked Lady Hampshire. "You look pale." Victoria blinked and turned back. "Yes, just a small headache. It will pass." More guests came in. The rooms got warmer, music played louder. Victoria moved from group to group, making sure everyone had what they needed. She was the perfect host, like always. But her eyes kept finding Thomas, and Thomas kept finding the Marquess's daughter. They talked by the fire, they laughed by the food table, they stood close by the window, his head bent to hear her words. "Who is she?" Victoria asked Lady Weston as they watched the girl laugh at something Thomas said. "Miss Sophia Westmoreland. Just had her first season in London. They say she turned down 5 offers already." Victoria nodded and sipped her drink. The sweet wine tasted like nothing in her mouth. When dinner was called, Thomas led Sophia to the table. He put her in the seat of honour at his right hand, where Victoria's closest friend should sit. Victoria sat at the other end of the long table, smiling and talking, while something inside her started to crack. After dinner, the dancing began. Thomas danced with Sophia first, then second, then a third time. People started to notice. Victoria saw the looks, the whispers behind fans. She kept her smile fixed on her face like a mask. "He's making a fool of himself," said Lord Harrington. An old friend standing next to her. "And of you." "It's just dancing," Victoria said, her voice light. But her hands were cold and her heart beat fast. As the clock struck 10, Victoria noticed Thomas and Sophia were gone. She looked in the card room, the library, the small sitting room. They were not there. "Have you seen Lord Thomas?" she asked a servant. "I believe he went to show Miss Westmoreland the garden, my lady." Outside, the night was dark. Stars filled the sky, and a half-moon gave just enough light to see the paths. Victoria walked slowly, following the sound of voices. Around a tall bush she stopped. There stood Thomas, holding Sophia's hands in his. And as Victoria watched, her husband, her life, her place in the world, bent down and kissed the young woman. The world seemed to stop. The air froze in Victoria's chest. 10 years of being the perfect wife crashed down around her like broken glass. She must have made a sound, for Thomas looked up. His eyes met hers across the garden. In them she saw not love, not shame, but relief. As if he was glad to be caught, as if he wanted her to know. Victoria turned and walked back to the house, her steps slow and steady. Her face gave nothing away, but inside her heart beat 3 words with each step. "It's all over. It's all over. It's all over." Victoria walked back into the bright room filled with people. Her hands shook, but she held them tight against her blue dress. The music still played. People still laughed. But everything felt different now. The sounds were too sharp, the lights too bright. Her skin felt like it didn't fit right anymore. Lady Hampshire rushed up to her. "There you are." "We were wondering where you went." "Just getting some fresh air," Victoria said. Her voice came out smooth and calm like nothing was wrong. She had spent years learning how to hide her true feelings. "Is Lord Thomas still showing the gardens to that Westmoreland girl?" Lady Hampshire asked, her eyes sharp. "People are starting to talk." Victoria looked at the big clock on the wall. It was 10:30. Thomas and Sophia had been gone for half an hour. Too long. Everyone knew it was too long. "I'm sure they'll be back soon," Victoria said. But she wasn't sure at all. The pain in her chest felt like a rock pressing down. More time passed. 11 o'clock came. Some guests started to leave. They made up reasons, early meetings, sick children at home, but Victoria saw the real reason in their eyes. They didn't want to be here when the storm broke. "Lady Blackwood," Lord Harrington said quietly beside her, "perhaps you should check on your husband again." Victoria shook her head. "He knows his duty. He will return when he is ready." But 11:30 came, and still Thomas and Sophia did not return. The music had stopped. The food was gone. Only 20 guests remained, watching Victoria with sad eyes. "My dear," Lady Weston said, touching Victoria's arm, "you don't have to stay here. Go to your room. We will make your excuses." "No," Victoria said firmly. "This is my home. These are my guests." She would not hide. She would not run. At 11:45, the garden doors opened. Thomas walked in with Sophia on his arm. Her pink dress was wrinkled. Leaves clung to the bottom edge. Thomas's hair was messy, and his face was flushed. They looked happy, so happy that they didn't even notice how quiet the room had become. Victoria stood very still as they walked toward her. 20 pairs of eyes watched. 20 breaths held. The room was so quiet she could hear the clock ticking. "Victoria," Thomas said when he saw her. He didn't look sorry. He looked excited, like a boy with a new toy. "I need to speak with you, in private." "Whatever you have to say can be said here," Victoria replied. Her voice was like ice, cold and hard. "After all, it seems everyone already knows." Thomas frowned. He didn't like being told no. Not by her. Not by the wife who always did what he wanted. "Very well," he said. He kept holding Sophia's hand. "Victoria, I want a divorce." Someone gasped. Lady Hampshire dropped her glass. It hit the floor and broke into tiny pieces, but no one moved to clean it up. "A divorce?" Victoria repeated. The word felt strange in her mouth. Divorce meant shame. Divorce meant being cut off from friends, from parties, from the life she had worked so hard to build. "Yes," Thomas said. "I've fallen in love with Sophia. We want to marry." "I see." Victoria looked at the girl who couldn't meet her eyes. Sophia looked at the floor, her cheeks pink. She didn't look sorry either. "We didn't mean for it to happen," Thomas went on. "But we've been meeting for weeks now. I've never felt this way before. I'm sure you understand." Weeks. They had been meeting for weeks, while Victoria planned dinners and picked out his clothes and made sure his favourite foods were on the table. While she played the perfect wife, he had been falling in love with someone else. "When?" she asked. "When did this start?" "At the Pembroke ball last month," Thomas said. "Sophia was there with her father. We danced and... well, I knew then." 1 month. In 1 month he had decided to throw away 10 years of marriage. "I've already spoken to my lawyer," Thomas continued. "The papers will be ready next week. You'll get a fair settlement, of course. Enough to live on. Not here, of course. Rosewood Hall will go to my next wife." Next wife. Like Victoria was just being replaced like an old chair or a worn-out coat. "You've thought of everything," she said quietly. "I have. I know this is hard, but it's for the best. You and I, we were never really in love. It was a good match, a smart match. But what I feel for Sophia is real." Victoria looked around the room. All these people had been at their wedding. They had watched her and Thomas dance their first dance. They had toasted to their happy future. Now they watched as it all fell apart. "You will have your divorce," Victoria said at last. "But tonight, this is still my home. These are still my guests, and you, Lord Thomas, are making a scene." Thomas's face turned red. "I'm making a scene. You're the one who—" "Good night, Thomas," Victoria cut him off. "Miss Westmoreland." She turned away from them and walked to Lady Hampshire. "More wine, I think. The night is still young." But the night wasn't young. It was old and tired and sad. One by one, the guests made excuses and left. They patted Victoria's hand. They kissed her cheek. They promised to call on her soon. She knew most of them would not. By 1 in the morning, the house was empty. The servants put out the candles. They picked up the glasses. They swept the floors. Victoria sat alone in the big room that had held so much noise and life just hours before. Thomas did not come back downstairs. She could hear him moving around in his room above, packing probably, getting ready to leave her behind. Victoria went to her desk in the small room off the big hall. She took out paper and pen. She wrote 3 letters, one to her bank, one to her cousin in the country, one to her lawyer. Her handwriting was neat and clean. Her words were clear. She would not cry on the paper. When she was done, she sealed the letters with red wax. She put them in a neat pile for the morning post. Then she went upstairs to her room. Jane waited to help her undress. "My lady," she said softly, "I'm so sorry." "There's nothing to be sorry for," Victoria said. "These things happen. What will you do?" "I will sleep," Victoria said, "and tomorrow I will leave." "Leave? But where will you go?" "To my Aunt Henrietta in Dorset, by the sea." Jane's eyes went wide. "But Lady Henrietta is... They say she's not right in the head. She lives alone. She doesn't see anyone." "Yes," Victoria said. "That sounds perfect right now." When Jane was gone, Victoria looked at herself in the same mirror where she had stood that evening. Her hair was still perfect. Her dress was still smooth. Her pearls still shone in the candlelight. She looked exactly the same, but inside, everything had changed. The woman who had stood here hours ago was gone. That woman had believed in her marriage. That woman had trusted her place in the world. Victoria took off her pearls. She placed them carefully in their box. Next came her rings. The diamond one Thomas had given her when they married, the ruby one for their 5th year, the sapphire one for their 10th. She put them all away. Then she got into bed and blew out the candle. In the dark, she finally let herself cry. Not loud sobs, just quiet tears that rolled down her face and onto her pillow. Tomorrow she would be strong. Tomorrow she would leave this house and everything in it. Tomorrow she would start again. But tonight, Just for a few hours she would mourn the life that was now over. The carriage bumped and swayed as it moved down the long dirt road to Dorset. Victoria sat inside, her back straight even with no one to see her. Old habits were hard to break. After 3 days of travel, her blue dress was wrinkled and her hair was coming loose from its pins. She did not fix it. What was the point now? Rain hit the carriage windows like tiny fists. The world outside was grey and wet and cold. It matched how Victoria felt inside. "We're almost there, my lady," the driver called through the small window. "Seacliff Cottage is just around the bend." Victoria nodded, though the man couldn't see her. Aunt Henrietta had not answered her letter. Victoria wasn't sure if she would be welcome, but she had nowhere else to go. The carriage stopped in front of a small stone house. It sat on top of a cliff with the angry sea crashing below. No other houses were in sight. No people, no horses. Just the house, the cliff, and the endless grey water. "Are you sure this is the right place?" Victoria asked, looking out at the wild, lonely spot. "Yes, my lady, this is Seacliff Cottage." Victoria took a deep breath. She stepped out of the carriage into the rain. It soaked her dress and hair in seconds. The wind pushed against her like a rude stranger. The driver set her 2 small bags on the wet ground. "Shall I wait, my lady, in case no one is home?" Victoria looked at the house. Smoke came from the chimney. Someone was there. "No," she said. "You can go." The driver looked unsure. "It's very far from town, my lady, and with the weather." "I'll be fine. Thank you for bringing me." The driver climbed back onto his seat. The carriage rolled away, leaving Victoria alone on the cliff. The wheels made deep marks in the mud. Soon they would be gone, washed away by the rain. Victoria picked up her bags. They felt heavy now. She walked to the front door and knocked. No one came. She knocked again, louder. The door opened a crack. An old woman with wild white hair peered out. Her face was lined like a map with deep marks around her eyes and mouth. She wore a man's shirt and pants, not a dress. Victoria had never seen a woman dressed like that before. "Yes," the woman said. "Aunt Henrietta?" Victoria asked. "It's Victoria, Thomas's wife. Well, soon to be his ex-wife, I suppose." The old woman's eyes grew wide. She pulled the door open all the way. "Victoria? Little Victoria Smith? The one who married that fool Thomas Blackwood?" "Yes." "Well, don't just stand there in the rain. Come in, come in." Victoria stepped into the house. It was warm inside and it smelled like herbs and sea salt. Books were stacked everywhere, on tables, on chairs, on the floor. Papers with strange drawings covered the walls. It looked nothing like the clean, perfect rooms of Rosewood Hall. "Take off that wet dress before you catch cold," Henrietta said. "I'll find you something dry to wear." Victoria stood dripping on the stone floor. She felt lost. For 10 years she had servants to help her dress. She had never been in a house with no servants at all. Henrietta came back with a bundle of clothes. "Here, they won't be fancy, but they'll be warm. Change by the fire." Victoria changed into the simple dress. It was brown and plain, with no lace or ribbons. It felt strange on her skin. Too loose, too rough, but it was dry. Henrietta handed her a cup of hot tea. "Now tell me why you're here." Victoria tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Her throat felt tight. Her eyes burned. She had not cried since that first night, but now the tears came back. They ran down her face and into her tea. "Thomas left me," she finally said. "For a younger woman. A girl, really. He wants a divorce." Henrietta didn't look shocked or sad. She just nodded. "Men often do foolish things when they get older. They think a young wife will make them young again. Everyone in London knows by now," Victoria said. "The shame of it." "Shame?" Henrietta snorted. "The only one who should feel shame is Thomas, not you. That's not how society sees it. A divorced woman is damaged." "Society is full of idiots," Henrietta said. "You can stay here as long as you want. No one will bother you here." That night, Victoria slept in a small room under the roof. Rain beat against the window all night long. The wind howled like a sad animal. Victoria lay awake, listening to the storm outside and the storm inside her heart. She thought about her life in London, her fine dresses, her big house, her place at the head of the table, all gone now, like footprints washed away by the tide. For the next week, Victoria barely left her room. She slept late into the morning. She picked at the food Henrietta brought her. She stared out the window at the grey sea. "You can't hide in here forever," Henrietta said on the 8th day. "Come help me in the garden." "It's raining," Victoria said. It had been raining every day since she arrived. "Rain makes things grow," Henrietta said. "Put on a coat and come outside." Victoria found an old coat hanging by the door. It was too big for her and smelled like sea and dirt. She put it on and followed Henrietta into the small garden behind the house. The rain was softer now, more like mist than drops. Henrietta knelt in the mud and pulled weeds from around small green plants. Victoria stood watching, her hands at her sides. "Well," Henrietta said, "are you going to help or just stand there?" "I don't know how," Victoria admitted. "I've never gardened before." "Never? Not even as a child?" "No, my mother said ladies don't dig in the dirt." Henrietta laughed. "Your mother was wrong about many things. Kneel down here." Victoria knelt in the mud. Her brown dress got wet and dirty. A month ago this would have bothered her. Now she didn't care. "These are weeds," Henrietta said, pointing to small plants with jagged leaves. "Pull them out, roots and all. These with the round leaves are herbs. Leave those." Victoria began to pull the weeds. The dirt got under her fingernails. Her hands, once soft and white, were soon brown and scratched. But there was something good about the work. It was simple, clear. Pull the weeds, leave the herbs. No fancy rules to follow. No smiling when you wanted to cry. They worked until the basket was full of weeds. Victoria's back hurt. Her knees were sore. But she felt something she hadn't felt in days. Hungry. "There," Henrietta said, standing up. "That's enough for today. Let's wash up and eat." Inside, they washed their hands at the kitchen pump. Victoria looked down at her dirty dress, her muddy shoes, her red hands. "I look like a farmer's wife." "You look like someone who did honest work today," Henrietta said. "Better than looking like a doll on a shelf." That night, Victoria ate a full meal for the first time since coming to Seacliff Cottage. The food was simple, fish stew and brown bread, but it tasted good. After dinner, she sat by the fire while Henrietta read from a book about plants. "I should write to my lawyer," Victoria said suddenly, "about the divorce papers." Henrietta looked up from her book. "Do you want to fight the divorce?" "No, Thomas doesn't want me anymore. Fighting won't change that." "Then what do you want from the lawyer?" Victoria thought about it. "I want a fair share of what's mine. I helped build Thomas's business. I ran his house. I made him look good to his friends." Henrietta smiled. "Good. That's the first smart thing I've heard you say since you got here." The next morning, Victoria wrote to her lawyer. Her handwriting wasn't as neat as before. Her words weren't as careful, but they were stronger. When she was done, she sealed the letter and walked to the small village 2 miles away to mail it. The walk was long and the path was rough. By the time she got back to the cottage, her feet hurt and her legs were tired. But the fresh air had cleared her head. The exercise had made her feel stronger. Days passed, then weeks. The rain stopped and the sun came out. Victoria worked in the garden every day. She learned to cook simple meals. She read Henrietta's books about plants and the sea. At night, she still cried sometimes. She still felt the hole where her old life had been. But the hole was getting smaller. Other things were filling the empty space. New skills, new ideas, the rhythm of a different kind of life. One morning, a month after coming to Seacliff Cottage, Victoria walked to the edge of the cliff. The sea below was no longer grey but blue and green and silver. The wind still pushed against her, but now it felt good on her face. "I'm still here," she whispered to the sea and sky. "I'm still here." She wasn't the same Victoria who had stood in front of her mirror at Rosewood Hall. That Victoria was gone. This new Victoria had dirt under her nails and wind in her hair, and a strength she never knew she had. She was broken, yes, but she wasn't destroyed. And maybe, just maybe, being broken had let some light into places that had been dark for too long. Summer came to the little house on the cliff. The days grew long and warm. The grey rain clouds went away, and the sky turned a deep blue that matched the sea below. Victoria spent most days outside now. Her skin, once pale like cream, turned golden from the sun. Her hands, once soft, grew strong and sure from work. One morning, Victoria found Henrietta in a small room at the back of the house. The walls were lined with glass jars. Each jar held plants or creatures from the sea, starfish, shells, seaweed, and things Victoria couldn't name. "What is all this?" Victoria asked, looking at a jar with a strange spiky ball inside. "My life's work," Henrietta said. She picked up the jar. "This is a sea urchin. Most people think it's just a useless, ugly thing. But look closer." Victoria looked at the small round creature. Its spikes made a pattern like a star. "It's not ugly at all," she said. "It's quite pretty, really." "Yes, and useful too. The fishermen use them for bait, and in some places people eat them." Henrietta put the jar back on the shelf. "I've spent 40 years studying the plants and animals of this coast. Things most people never notice." "Is that why you live out here alone? To study?" Henrietta smiled, but her eyes looked sad. "Partly, and partly because the world had no place for a woman who cared more for learning than for finding a husband." She looked at Victoria. "When I was young, I wanted to go to university. My father laughed at me, said it was a waste of money to educate a girl. So you came here instead?" "Not right away. First I married, a man from a good family. He seemed kind at first, but after we married he didn't want me to read. Said it gave me strange ideas. When I found out I couldn't have children, he left me." Henrietta touched a jar with a delicate fan-shaped plant inside. "That's when I came here. To heal. To think. To learn." Victoria felt a strange connection to this old woman. They had both been left by men who didn't understand them. They had both come to this wild place to put themselves back together. "Would you like to learn about these things?" Henrietta asked, waving her hand at the shelves of jars. "Yes," Victoria said. "I would like that very much." That day began Victoria's real education. Each morning they walked along the beach at the bottom of the cliff. They collected shells and seaweed and small creatures in buckets. They brought them back to Henrietta's workroom to study. "This is a microscope," Henrietta said, showing Victoria a strange metal tube on a stand. "Look through here." Victoria put her eye to the small hole. Inside was a piece of seaweed. But through the microscope it wasn't just a piece of green plant. It was a world of tiny parts, each one perfect and amazing. "I've never seen anything like this," Victoria whispered, still looking through the microscope. "Few women have," Henrietta said. "Men keep these tools for themselves. They think we're too simple to understand such things. But that's not fair. No, it's not. The world is full of unfair things. That's why I live out here, where I can make my own rules." In the afternoons, they sat in the workroom. Henrietta taught Victoria how to draw what they found. Each line, each curve, each tiny part shown just as it was. Victoria's first drawings were rough and wrong in many ways, but she got better with each try. "You have a good eye," Henrietta said, looking at Victoria's drawing of a shell, "and a steady hand." "Thank you," Victoria said. The small praise made her feel warm inside. Thomas had never praised her for anything except how she looked, or how she managed his house. As the weeks passed, Victoria learned more than just drawing and collecting. She learned the names of everything they found. Not just the common names, but the special names scientists used. She learned how to preserve specimens in jars with a clear liquid that kept them from rotting. She learned how to press seaweed between sheets of paper so it dried flat and kept its shape. "You're a quick learner," Henrietta said one evening as they sat by the fire. "Much quicker than I was at your age." "I've never learned so much before," Victoria said. "At school, they only taught us how to be proper ladies, how to pour tea and play the piano and speak a little French." "What a waste," Henrietta snorted. "Filling your head with nonsense when it could hold real knowledge." Victoria looked down at her hands. They were no longer the soft white hands of a lady. They were tanned and strong, with short nails and small scars. "Thomas wouldn't recognize me now. Would that be so bad?" "No," Victoria said, surprised to find she meant it. "I don't think I want to be the person he knew anymore." One day, a letter came from Victoria's lawyer. The divorce was final. Thomas had agreed to give her a small amount of money each year, not a lot, but enough to live on if she was careful. He kept the house, of course, and most of their things. "How do you feel?" Henrietta asked when Victoria told her the news. Victoria thought about it. "Lighter, like I put down a heavy bag I've been carrying." "Good. Now you can start to build something new." As summer turned to fall, Victoria spent more time in Henrietta's library. The old woman had hundreds of books, not novels or poetry like Victoria had read before, but books about the sea, about plants, about stars, about how the world worked. "This one explains how beaches form," Henrietta said, handing Victoria a thick book. "And this one is about the movements of the tides." Victoria read for hours each day. Sometimes the words were hard to understand. Sometimes the ideas seemed too big for her mind to hold. But each day she understood a little more. "I wish I had learned these things years ago," she told Henrietta. "It's never too late to learn," Henrietta said. "I was 40 when I started my studies. Now I'm 72 and I learn new things every day." One rainy afternoon, they sat in the library sorting through papers. Henrietta had years of notes about her discoveries, but they were a mess, stuffed in drawers, piled on shelves, tucked between the pages of books. "We need to put these in order," Henrietta said, "so others can use them when I'm gone." "Gone? Are you going somewhere?" Henrietta laughed. "Only where we all go eventually, my dear. I'm not young anymore." The thought of Henrietta dying made Victoria's chest hurt. This strange old woman had become important to her. More than important, she had become a friend, a teacher, a guide. "What will happen to all your work when you're gone?" Victoria asked. "That's what I've been thinking about," Henrietta said. She pulled a letter from her pocket. "This came yesterday. From the Royal Science Academy in London. What does it say?" "They've heard of my collection. One of the fishermen in the village must have talked about it. They want to send someone to look at it. They think it might be important." "That's wonderful," Victoria said. "Your work will be recognised." Henrietta didn't look as happy as Victoria expected. "Maybe. Or maybe they'll take one look at it and laugh. The scribblings of a crazy old woman who lives alone by the sea." "They won't laugh," Victoria said firmly. "Your work is good. It's important. I've learned enough now to see that." Henrietta smiled at her. "You have, haven't you? You've learned more in a few months than many learn in years. Because you're a good teacher? No, because you were ready to learn. Because something inside you was hungry for more than gossip and tea parties." That night, Victoria lay in bed thinking about the letter from the academy. She felt excited for Henrietta, but also a little afraid. If people from London came here, they might recognise her. They might bring news of Thomas and his new wife. They might remind her of the life she had lost. But had she really lost it? Or had she found something better? Here in this small house, with this strange old woman, Victoria had discovered parts of herself she never knew existed. She had found a mind that could think and learn. She had found hands that could work and create. She had found strength she didn't know she had. The next morning, Victoria woke up early. She went to Henrietta's workroom and began to clean. She arranged the jars in neat rows. She sorted the drawings into piles. She wiped dust from the microscope and other tools. When Henrietta came in, she stopped in the doorway. "What are you doing?" "Getting ready," Victoria said. "If the academy is sending someone, we should show them your work properly. Not all jumbled up, but organised so they can see how important it is." Henrietta looked at her for a long moment. Then she smiled. "We?" "Yes, we," Victoria said. "You've shared your knowledge with me. Now I'll help you share it with the world." Fall turned to winter, and the little house on the cliff grew cold. Winds from the sea rattled the windows. Rain turned to sleet, then to snow. Victoria and Henrietta spent their days inside, close to the fire. They organised Henrietta's notes. They cleaned and labelled the specimen jars. They fixed the leaky roof and patched the draughty windows. "We need more books," Henrietta said one grey morning, "and supplies for the specimens, but I'm too old to make the trip to town in this weather." Victoria looked outside at the wind-bent trees and the angry sea below. "I could go," she offered. "It's a 10-mile walk to Dorchester. That's too far in this weather." "I'm stronger now," Victoria said, "and I haven't seen a town in 5 months. Maybe it's time." Henrietta studied her face. "Perhaps it is, but not alone and not on foot. I'll ask young Tom to take you in his cart." Young Tom was the fisherman's son from the village. The next day, he came with his small cart pulled by an old brown horse. Victoria put on her warmest clothes, a thick wool dress that Henrietta had made for her, sturdy boots, and a heavy coat. "Here's the list," Henrietta said, handing Victoria a paper and a small purse of money. "And take your time. Look around. The world won't bite you." The cart bounced and creaked along the muddy road. Victoria held tight to her seat as they went up and down hills. Young Tom didn't talk much. He just whistled and clicked to his horse. After 2 hours, they came to Dorchester. It wasn't London, not even close. The buildings were small and plain. The streets were narrow and dirty. But to Victoria, who had seen nothing but sea and cliffs for months, it seemed huge and busy. "I'll meet you at the Three Bells Inn at 4 o'clock, young Tom said, helping her down from the cart. "Don't be late or we'll be driving home in the dark." Victoria nodded and watched him drive away. She stood still for a moment, feeling strange to be alone in a town. People walked past her not knowing who she was, not caring. It felt good to be nobody special. She looked at Henrietta's list. First, the bookstore. She found it on a small side street, a narrow shop with books piled to the ceiling. The air inside smelled of paper and dust and ink. An old man with glasses perched on his nose looked up as she entered. "Can I help you, miss?" "Yes, I need these books." She handed him the list. The man looked at it with raised eyebrows. "These are science books, university-level stuff." "Yes, they're for my aunt. She's a naturalist." "A woman naturalist? Well, I never." But he went to find the books. While she waited, Victoria wandered through the store. Her fingers trailed over spines of books she had never heard of. Books about far-off places. Books about history. Books about things she had never thought to learn. "Here you are," the bookseller said, placing a stack on the counter. "That'll be £3, 6 shillings. Victoria counted out the money from Henrietta's purse. The books were heavy. She would need to find a bag to carry them in. Next on the list was the apothecary for chemicals to preserve specimens. The man there also looked surprised at her requests, but he filled them without comment. Then she went to the dry goods store for paper, pens and other supplies. By 1 o'clock she'd gotten everything on the list. Her arms were tired from carrying the packages. She found a small tea shop and went inside to rest. The shop was warm and smelled like fresh bread. Victoria chose a table by the window where she could watch people pass by. A young woman took her order, just tea and a bun. That was all she could afford. As she sipped her tea, she heard a woman at the next table talking. "Lady Hampshire is hosting a literary salon next week. She's invited that writer from London, you know, the one who wrote the book about birds." Victoria froze. Lady Hampshire had been one of her friends in London, the woman who had stood beside her on that terrible night when Thomas had asked for a divorce. "I hear the Duke of Northbridge will be there too," another woman said. "He just got back from his work in Vienna." "A duke? Here in Dorchester?" "Yes. He's staying with his cousin at Westfield Manor. They say he's quite handsome, for an older man." Victoria finished her tea quickly and left. Her heart was beating fast. What if she ran into Lady Hampshire? Would the woman remember her? Would she tell everyone about the scandal? But as she walked down the street, she realised something. She didn't look like Lady Victoria Blackwood anymore. Her hair was not in a fancy style, but braided simply down her back. Her dress was plain wool, not silk. Her hands were rough from work. Even her face had changed, tanned by the sun with small lines at the corners of her eyes from squinting at tiny specimens. No one would recognise her. No one would know. The thought made her stand taller. She was free here, free to be whoever she wanted to be. She decided to explore the town before meeting young Tom. She walked down streets she hadn't seen before. She looked in shop windows at things she couldn't afford but enjoyed seeing. Near the edge of town, she found a small museum. A sign outside said, "Natural History Specimens on Display." Without thinking, she went inside. The museum was just one large room. Glass cases lined the walls filled with rocks and shells and stuffed birds. A few people wandered about looking at the displays. Victoria moved from case to case, studying each item. Many were things she had seen before at Seacliff Cottage, but some were new. Creatures from far-off places, rocks from deep in the earth. "Interesting, aren't they?" a deep voice said beside her. Victoria turned to find a tall man standing there. He was older, maybe 50, with grey at his temples. His clothes were fine but not flashy. His eyes were kind, with small wrinkles at the corners like he smiled a lot. "Yes," she said. "Very interesting." "You're looking at them quite closely," the man said. "Most visitors just glance and move on." "I've been studying natural specimens," Victoria explained. "My aunt is teaching me." "Your aunt? Is she a scientist?" "She calls herself a naturalist. She studies the plants and animals of the Dorset coast." The man's eyes lit up. "Really? I'd very much like to meet her. I've been looking for information about coastal species." "Why?" Victoria asked. "I've spent the last 5 years studying the coastal wildlife of Europe, Austria, Germany, France. Now I'm back in England to compare what I've found." "You're a scientist?" "Of a sort. More of a diplomat who loves science." He smiled and held out his hand. "Alexander Westfield, Duke of Northbridge." Victoria's breath caught. The Duke Lady Hampshire had invited to her salon, the one the women in the tea shop had talked about. She should have curtsied. She should have used his title. That's what the old Victoria would have done. But the new Victoria just took his hand and shook it, the way Henrietta shook hands with the fisherman. "Victoria Smith," she said, using her maiden name for the first time in years. It felt strange on her tongue, but good too, like putting on an old comfortable dress she had forgotten she owned. "A pleasure to meet you, Miss Smith. Or is it Mrs.? "Miss," she said. It wasn't quite true, but it wasn't quite a lie either. She wasn't Lady Blackwood anymore, that was certain. "Tell me more about your aunt's work," the Duke said. "I'm particularly interested in sea plants." "She has a wonderful collection of seaweeds," Victoria said. "Pressed and preserved. She's been studying them for 40 years. 40 years? And I've never heard of her? What's her name?" "Henrietta Wyndham." The Duke's eyes went wide. "The Henrietta Wyndham who wrote notes on the marine flora of the southern coast?" Now it was Victoria's turn to be surprised. "You've read her work?" "Read it? I've studied it. It's brilliant. But everyone said she died years ago." Victoria smiled. "Not dead. Just hiding from people who didn't understand her work." "I understand it. Or at least I try to." He looked at her with new interest. "And you're her student?" "Yes, for the last 6 months. She must think highly of you. From what I've heard, she doesn't take students, or visitors, or talk to anyone, really." Victoria laughed. "That's all true. I'm a special case. I'm her niece, and I needed a place to start over." The Duke looked like he wanted to ask more, but he just nodded. "We all need that sometimes." He glanced at the clock on the wall. "I've taken up too much of your time, but I would very much like to meet your aunt. Would she allow a visit, do you think?" Victoria thought about it. Henrietta didn't like visitors, but she did want her work to be recognised, and the Duke seemed genuinely interested. "I think she might," Victoria said, "if you're truly interested in her work, not just curious about the strange old woman on the cliff. I promise you, it's her work I care about." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small card. "Here's where I'm staying. If your aunt is willing to meet, send word. I'll come any day, any time." Victoria took the card. Their fingers touched for a moment. A strange feeling went through her, like the shock you get from touching metal on a cold day. "I should go," she said quickly. "I have to meet my ride back." "Of course." "I hope to hear from you, Miss Smith." Victoria gathered her packages and hurried to the Three Bells Inn. Young Tom was waiting, looking impatient. "Almost left without you," he grumbled. "Sun's going down soon." "I'm sorry," Victoria said, climbing into the cart. "I lost track of time." As they rattled out of town, Victoria looked back. The Duke was standing on the steps of the museum watching her go. He raised his hand in a small wave. Victoria waved back, then quickly turned around. Her heart was beating fast again, but not from fear this time, from something else, something she hadn't felt in a very long time. "Who was that man waving at you?" young Tom asked. "Just someone I met at the museum," Victoria said. "A scientist." But as the cart bumped along the dark road home, she kept feeling the touch of his fingers on hers. And she kept wondering what Henrietta would say when she heard who wanted to visit. 3 days passed before Henrietta agreed to let the Duke visit. "I don't like strangers in my home," she grumbled. "They touch things. They ask stupid questions." "He's read your book," Victoria reminded her. "He's studied your work. Or so he says." But Henrietta had spent the morning cleaning the workroom, putting her best specimens in front. Victoria hid a smile. Henrietta cared more than she wanted to admit. They sent young Tom with a note to the Duke's lodgings. The boy returned that afternoon with a reply. The Duke would come tomorrow at 10 in the morning. Victoria woke early the next day. She put on her best dress, not fancy by London standards, just a clean blue wool dress that Henrietta had made for her. She brushed her hair until it shone and tied it back with a ribbon. Then she laughed at herself in the small mirror. Why did she care how she looked? The Duke was coming to see Henrietta's work, not her. At exactly 10 o'clock they heard hooves on the path. Victoria looked out the window. The Duke rode a tall black horse. He wore a warm coat against the winter chill, but not the fancy clothes dukes usually wore. He looked more like a regular man than a nobleman. "He's here," Victoria called to Henrietta, who was fussing over her specimens one last time. Victoria opened the door before the Duke could knock. He stood with his hand raised, ready to rap on the door. When he saw her, he smiled. His eyes crinkled at the corners in a way that made Victoria's stomach feel strange. "Miss Smith," he said, taking off his hat. "Thank you for inviting me." "My aunt is excited to meet you," Victoria said. That wasn't quite true. Henrietta was nervous, not excited, but it seemed like the right thing to say. "I'm honoured she agreed to see me," the Duke said, following Victoria inside. The cottage seemed smaller with him in it. He was tall, and his shoulders were broad. He had to duck his head under the low doorways. Henrietta stood in the workroom, trying to look stern and important in her old clothes. "Your Grace," she said with a small nod, "I understand you've read my book." "I have, Lady Wyndham," the Duke said. "It's one of the finest works on coastal plant life I've ever encountered." "Just Miss Wyndham," Henrietta corrected him. "I've never been a lady." "Forgive me. In my mind, anyone who contributes such knowledge to the world deserves a title of respect." Henrietta's face softened a bit. "Well, yes, I suppose that's true." She waved her hand at the shelves of specimens. "These are my life's work, 40 years of study." "May I?" the Duke asked, stepping closer to the shelves. Yes. Look all you want, just don't move anything." For the next hour, the Duke examined Henrietta's collection. He asked smart questions. He knew the names of things. He understood her notes. Henrietta began to relax. She showed him her rarest specimens, the ones she kept in special drawers, away from the light. "This is extraordinary," the Duke said, holding up a jar with a strange, almost clear creature inside. "A juvenile sea angel. I've only seen drawings of these." "Found it after the big storm last year," Henrietta said proudly. "Washed up on the beach, barely alive. Managed to preserve it before it fell apart." Victoria watched them talk. The Duke treated Henrietta like an equal, like a fellow scientist, not a strange old woman. And Henrietta was talking more than Victoria had ever seen her talk to anyone except herself. "Would you like some tea?" Victoria asked when there was a pause in their conversation. "That would be lovely," the Duke said. "I'll make it," Henrietta said, surprising Victoria. Henrietta never made tea for visitors. She never had visitors. When Henrietta left the room, the Duke turned to Victoria. "Your aunt is remarkable. Her knowledge is incredible." "I know," Victoria said. "I've learned so much from her." "And what about you?" he asked. "Are you planning to follow in her footsteps? Become a naturalist yourself?" Victoria hadn't thought about it before. "I don't know. I'm still learning, still finding my way." "You said you came here to start over," the Duke said softly. "May I ask what you're starting over from?" Victoria looked down at her hands. They were stronger now, with small scars from work, not the soft, useless hands she'd had in London. "A marriage that ended badly," she said. It was the first time she had told anyone besides Henrietta. "My husband left me, for a younger woman." The Duke didn't look shocked. He didn't look sorry for her. He just nodded. People leave for many reasons, sometimes because they're looking for something they think they're missing. Sometimes because they're running from something in themselves. "You sound like you know from experience." "I was married once," the Duke said. "She died 10 years ago." "I'm sorry. Thank you. It was hard, but time helps, and finding purpose." "Is that why you study the sea? To find purpose?" He smiled. "Partly, and partly because the sea is honest. It doesn't care if you're a duke or a fisherman. It shows you its wonders either way." Henrietta came back with tea. They sat around the small table by the fire. The Duke told them about his travels, the coasts of France and Spain, the rocky shores of Greece, the cold beaches of Norway. "I'm writing a book," he said, "comparing the coastal life of different parts of Europe, but my section on England is weak. I need more information." "You should come back tomorrow," Henrietta said suddenly. "I have more specimens to show you, and notes you might find useful." The Duke looked pleased. "I would be delighted, if it's not too much trouble." "No trouble," Henrietta said. "Victoria can show you the beach where I found most of my specimens." Victoria felt her face grow warm. Henrietta was matchmaking. The old woman had never shown any interest in such things before. The next day the Duke returned. This time he brought books, rare books about sea life that Henrietta had never seen. She fell on them like a hungry person on food. "While Henrietta reads," Victoria said, "would you like to see the beach?" The Duke smiled. "Very much." They walked down the narrow path to the beach below the cliff. The day was cold but clear. The winter sun made the sea sparkle like it was full of tiny diamonds. "Watch your step here," Victoria warned as they came to a steep part of the path. "It gets slippery when it's wet." Too late. The Duke's foot slipped on the muddy path. Victoria reached out to steady him. Her hand caught his arm. He grabbed her hand to keep from falling. For a moment they stood frozen like that, holding on to each other. "Thank you," the Duke said. His face was close to hers. She could see the different shades of blue in his eyes, dark blue around the edges, lighter blue in the middle. "You're welcome," Victoria said. Her voice came out in a whisper. They walked more carefully the rest of the way down. The beach was empty except for a few seagulls. Waves crashed against the shore, then pulled back, leaving foam on the sand. "This is where Henrietta finds most of her specimens," Victoria said. "After storms, all sorts of things wash up." The Duke bent down and picked up a shell. It was small and perfectly shaped, like a tiny swirl of cream. "Beautiful," he said, handing it to Victoria. "Like you." Victoria felt her cheeks turn pink. No one had called her beautiful in a long time. Thomas used to, but only when he wanted something. The Duke didn't seem to want anything. "I'm not beautiful," she said. "Not anymore." "You are," he insisted. "Not in the way of painted ladies in London drawing rooms, but in a real way, a strong way." They walked along the beach for an hour, picking up shells and talking. The Duke told her about his home in the north. Victoria told him about growing up as the daughter of a merchant who wanted to rise in society. "That's why I married Thomas," she admitted. "He had a title. My father wanted me to be a lady. And now, what do you want?" Victoria looked out at the sea. "I want to be real," she said. "Like this place. No pretending, no masks." "I think you already are," the Duke said. They climbed back up the cliff path. At the top, Victoria stopped to catch her breath. The Duke stopped beside her. For a moment, they stood looking out at the wide, wild sea. "It makes you feel small, doesn't it?" the Duke said. "All that water, all that power." "Yes," Victoria agreed, "but not in a bad way. In a way that reminds you what's real and what's not." The Duke looked at her. "Exactly. That's exactly it." Every day for the next week the Duke came to Seacliff Cottage. Sometimes he and Henrietta talked for hours about sea life. Sometimes he and Victoria walked on the beach or the cliffs. Once they rode his horse to a hidden cove 5 miles down the coast, where they found strange shells no one had ever shown Henrietta before. One evening, as the Duke was getting ready to leave, he said, "There's a lecture at the Dorchester Museum next week about new discoveries in marine biology. Would you and your aunt like to come, as my guests? In town? With people?" Henrietta looked doubtful. "Your work should be known," the Duke said. "These people would be interested. They would understand." Henrietta thought about it. "You go," she told Victoria. "I'm too old for town gatherings. But you should go." "Are you sure?" Victoria asked. "Yes. Take some of my specimens to show the lecturer. The rare ones. See what he says." So it was decided. The Duke would come in his carriage the following Wednesday to take Victoria to the lecture. Henrietta helped her fix her blue dress, adding a bit of lace at the collar to make it more suitable for town. "You like him," Henrietta said as she sewed. "He's kind," Victoria said, "and smart. And handsome, for an old man." Victoria laughed. "He's not old. He's 50. Like I said, old. But a good man, I think. Not like your Thomas." Victoria hadn't thought of Thomas in weeks. Now his face came into her mind. Handsome, sure, but also selfish. Cold. "No," she agreed. "Not like Thomas at all." The night before the lecture, Victoria couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the Duke, Alexander, as she now called him, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the way he listened when she talked. The way he saw her, really saw her, not as a pretty wife or a social connection, but as a person with thoughts and ideas. She got up and went to the window. The moon made a path of silver light across the dark water. Victoria touched the glass. It was cold under her fingers. Winter was ending, but slowly. Spring would come soon with new growth, new life. "Maybe for me too," she whispered to the night. The Duke's carriage arrived at exactly 2 o'clock on Wednesday. It was black and shiny, with gold trim on the doors. 2 white horses pulled it. The driver wore a tall black hat and a coat with the Duke's family crest on the pocket. It looked strange and fancy next to the small stone cottage. Victoria wore her blue dress with the lace collar. Henrietta had fixed her hair in a simple but nice style. She carried a small wooden box with 3 of Henrietta's best specimens inside. "Remember what I told you," Henrietta said as Victoria got ready to leave. "Stand straight. Look them in the eye. Don't let them make you feel small because you're a woman." "I won't," Victoria promised. She hugged the old woman. "Thank you." The Duke stepped down from the carriage to help her in. He wore a fine black coat and a silk hat. Victoria hadn't seen him in such nice clothes before. He looked every inch a duke today. "You look lovely," he said, taking her hand. "Thank you." Victoria felt shy suddenly, but out of place, I think. "I haven't been to town in months, and never to a lecture." "You'll be with me," the Duke said, "and you know more about sea creatures than most of the men who will be there." The carriage ride took less than an hour. Victoria watched out the window as the wild cliffs gave way to fields, then to the small town of Dorchester. The streets were busy with people and carts and horses. It seemed so loud after the quiet of Seacliff Cottage. "Nervous?" the Duke asked, watching her face. "A little," Victoria admitted. "It's been a long time since I was around so many people. Just remember, you're not here as anyone's wife or daughter. You're here as a student of natural history, as yourself." The museum was on a corner near the town square. It was bigger than Victoria remembered from her first visit. A sign outside announced the lecture. New Discoveries in Marine Biology by Professor James Williams. Inside, the main room was set up with rows of chairs. About 30 people were already there, mostly men in dark suits. A few women sat at the back, whispering to each other behind their fans. Victoria felt their eyes on her as she walked in with the Duke. "Is that the Duke of Northbridge?" one woman whispered, not very quietly. "Who is that woman with him?" Victoria held her head high, the way Henrietta had taught her. She would not be small today. The Duke led her to seats near the front. "Professor Williams is an old friend," he told her. "I want to introduce you after the lecture." A tall man with a grey beard and spectacles walked onto the small stage. He bowed to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming today. I am Professor James Williams, and I will be sharing some recent discoveries in the field of marine biology." For the next hour, the professor talked about sea creatures, showing drawings on large pieces of paper. Victoria listened closely. Much of what he said she already knew from Henrietta. But some things were new and interesting. When he showed a drawing of a sea angel, like the one in Henrietta's collection, Victoria leaned forward in her seat. The professor was saying they were very rare, almost impossible to find in English waters. "My aunt has one," she whispered to the Duke. "A perfect specimen." The Duke smiled. "I know, that's why I brought you here today." After the lecture, people stood around talking. The Duke led Victoria to the front where Professor Williams was gathering his papers. "James," the Duke said. "Excellent lecture as always." "Alexander," the professor looked up with a smile. "I didn't know you were back in England." "For a few months. I'm researching English coastal life for my book." The Duke turned to Victoria. "This is Miss Victoria Smith. She's been studying with her aunt, Miss Henrietta Wyndham." The professor's eyes went wide. "Henrietta Wyndham? The Henrietta Wyndham? She's alive?" "Very much so," the Duke said, "and still working. Miss Smith has brought some specimens to show you." Victoria opened the wooden box. Inside were 3 glass jars. One held the sea angel, perfectly preserved. One held a type of seaweed that glowed in the dark. The third held a tiny crab with spots that looked like eyes on its back. "My word," Professor Williams breathed, picking up the jar with the sea angel. "This is extraordinary. A perfect specimen. And these others." He looked at Victoria with new respect. "You say your aunt collected these?" "Yes," Victoria said. "She's been studying the coast for 40 years. I've been learning from her for the past 8 months." "I would very much like to meet her," the professor said. "Her work on seaweeds is legendary, but most of us thought she had died years ago." "She's quite private," Victoria explained, "but she might see you if you're genuinely interested in her work." More people gathered around, curious about the specimens. Soon, Victoria was surrounded by scientists and students, all asking questions. She answered the best she could, the way Henrietta had taught her. The Duke stood beside her, smiling proudly. After an hour, the Duke touched her arm. "There's someone else here to see the lecture. Someone I think you know." Victoria turned. At the back of the room stood a man in an expensive coat. He had brown hair with grey at the sides. His face was handsome in a cold way. Next to him was a young woman with yellow hair wearing a pink dress with too many ruffles, Thomas and Sophia. Victoria's heart beat fast. She hadn't seen Thomas since that night at Rosewood Hall when he had asked for a divorce. He looked older somehow, tired around the eyes. Sophia looked young and bored, playing with her fan and not listening to the people around her. "Did you know they would be here?" Victoria asked the Duke. "I heard Lord Blackwood was in town with his new wife," the Duke admitted. "I thought you should know, in case you wanted to avoid them." "I don't need to avoid them," Victoria said. The fear she expected to feel didn't come. Instead, she felt calm, strong. "Thomas can't hurt me anymore." "Are you sure?" The Duke looked worried. "We can leave if you prefer." "No, I'm having a wonderful time." "I won't let him ruin it." But it was too late to avoid Thomas. He had seen her. His eyes widened in surprise. He said something to Sophia, then started walking toward Victoria. "Victoria?" Thomas said when he reached her. "Is that really you?" "Hello, Thomas," Victoria said calmly. "Yes, it's me." Thomas looked her up and down, taking in her simple blue dress, her sun-tanned skin, her strong hands holding the box of specimens. "You look different." "I am different." Thomas glanced at the Duke, who stood protectively at Victoria's side. "Your Grace," he said with a small bow. "I didn't know you were acquainted with my ex-wife." "Miss Smith and I share an interest in natural history," the Duke said coolly. "She's been kind enough to show me some remarkable specimens collected by her aunt." Thomas laughed, but it wasn't a nice laugh. "Victoria? Interested in science? That's hard to believe. When we were married, she could barely tell a rose from a daisy." "People change," Victoria said, "when they're allowed to." Sophia came up behind Thomas, looking bored. "Thomas, darling, can we go now? This place smells like dead fish." "In a moment, my dear." Thomas kept his eyes on Victoria. "I heard you were living with your mad aunt on some cliff. I didn't believe it. I thought surely you'd be back in London by now trying to find another husband." "Why would I need another husband?" Victoria asked. "I'm perfectly happy as I am." Thomas's face turned red. He wasn't used to Victoria standing up to him. "Come now. A woman alone? It's not natural. You need a man to take care of you." "No," Victoria said firmly, I don't. I can take care of myself now." Thomas looked at the Duke again. "Is that so? Then why are you here with His Grace? Looking to move up in the world, are you? From Lord to Duke?" Now it was the Duke's turn to look angry. "Lord Blackwood, you forget yourself. Miss Smith is here as my guest because of her knowledge of marine specimens. Nothing more." "Of course," Thomas said with a mean smile. "Of course. But Victoria, really, this playing at science, it's beneath you. Why not come back to London? I know people who would help you find a suitable position. A companion to an older lady, perhaps. Something respectable." Victoria felt a flash of anger. "A position? You think I need your help to find a position? I have a position. I'm a naturalist. I study the sea. I learn. I discover. I grow." "A naturalist?" Thomas laughed again. "That's not a position for a lady. That's a hobby at best. What will you live on? That small allowance from the divorce won't last forever." "I'll manage," Victoria said. "I always do." Thomas stepped closer. His voice got lower. "The offer still stands, you know. I can find you a small house in London, set you up properly, make sure you're taken care of." "In exchange for what?" Victoria asked, though she already knew the answer. "Discretion. A clean break. No embarrassing stories about our past." He glanced at Sophia, who was talking to another woman a few feet away. "My new wife doesn't need to hear tales about my first marriage." Victoria looked at Thomas, really looked at him. She had once thought him handsome, powerful, important. Now he just seemed small, sad even. "I have no interest in telling tales, Thomas. Our marriage is in the past. I've moved on. You should too." Thomas's face hardened. "Moved on to what? This pretend life of science and sea creatures? Wake up, Victoria. You're a divorced woman with no family, no money, and no future. Your only hope is to find another man to marry you, and at your age that's unlikely. Unless," he looked at the Duke again with a sneer, "unless you've already found one willing to overlook your past." Victoria felt the Duke tense beside her, ready to defend her honour, but she put her hand on his arm to stop him. This was her battle to fight. "My past doesn't need overlooking," she said, her voice strong and clear. "I'm not ashamed of who I was or who I am now, and my future is my own to decide, not yours, not anyone's but mine." Thomas looked shocked. This was not the quiet, agreeable Victoria he had married. This was someone new, someone with a voice and a will of her own. "Come, Thomas," Sophia called, bored with waiting. "The carriage is outside." Thomas gave Victoria one last look. "Good luck with your science, then. You'll need it." He turned and walked away, taking Sophia's arm as he went. Victoria watched them go. She felt the Duke's hand on her back, warm and steady. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. "Yes," she said, and meant it. "I'm better than all right." And she was. Seeing Thomas again had shown her how far she'd come, how much she'd changed, how strong she'd grown. She wasn't afraid of him anymore. She wasn't afraid of being alone. She wasn't afraid of the future. "Miss Smith," Professor Williams called, coming over with one of her specimens. "Could you tell me more about where this was found? It's quite extraordinary." Victoria smiled at the Duke, then turned to the Professor. "Of course," she said. "My aunt and I found it on a small beach just below the cliffs." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of questions and answers, and excited discussions about sea life. By the time they left, it was dark outside. Stars filled the sky, and a cool wind blew from the sea. The Duke handed Victoria into his carriage. "You were magnificent today," he said. "The way you spoke to those scientists, the way you handled Lord Blackwood. I've never met anyone like you." Victoria smiled. "I surprised myself, to be honest. 6 months ago, I couldn't have done any of that." "What changed?" "I did," Victoria said simply. "I found out who I really am when all the fancy dresses and social rules were stripped away, and I like who I found." The Duke took her hand. His touch was warm in the cold carriage. "I like who you found too," he said softly. "Very much." As the carriage rolled through the dark countryside towards Seacliff Cottage, Victoria felt something new growing inside her. Something like hope, something like joy, something like love, but not the weak, needy love she had felt for Thomas. This was a stronger love, a braver love, a love born from knowing who she was and what she wanted, a love she could choose for herself. Spring came to Seacliff Cottage with a rush of green and colour. Tiny flowers pushed up through the soil in the garden. Birds built nests in the trees. The sea below the cliff turned from grey to blue as the sun grew stronger. Victoria stood in the garden helping Henrietta plant new herbs. Her hands dug into the warm dirt, making holes for the small plants. The sun felt good on her back. A year ago she would have worn a hat and gloves to keep her skin white. Now she let the sun touch her, turning her skin golden. "You're quiet today," Henrietta said. "Thinking about the Duke?" Victoria smiled. "Yes. He sent another letter. He wants me to come to Vienna with him." "And?" Henrietta patted soil around a small plant. "What will you do?" "I don't know yet." Victoria had been thinking about it for days. The Duke, Alexander, had asked her to marry him a month ago. She hadn't said yes right away. She needed time to think to be sure. "You love him," Henrietta said. It wasn't a question. "I do." And she did love him. Not like she had loved Thomas. That had been a young girl's love, built on dreams of being a fine lady. This was a woman's love, built on knowing who she was and who Alexander was. "But I'm afraid." Of what? Of being a duchess, of going back to that world of fancy parties and rules, of losing myself again. Henrietta stood up with a grunt, brushing dirt from her hands. "Do you think he would make you lose yourself?" "No," Victoria said, "but the world might. The way people would look at me, the way they would expect me to act." "Then don't act that way," Henrietta said simply. "Be who you are now, the woman who digs in the dirt and studies sea creatures, the woman who knows her own mind." Later that night, Victoria wrote to Alexander. She told him yes, she would marry him, but not right away. First, she wanted to help Henrietta prepare her work for the Royal Science Academy. Professor Williams had arranged for them to take her collection, to preserve it for future students. Alexander wrote back the next day. His letter was full of joy. He would wait as long as she needed. He loved her just as she was, dirt under her nails and all. 2 months later, on a sunny day in May, Henrietta's work was finally ready. 20 wooden crates filled with specimens and notes sat in the main room of the cottage. Tomorrow men from the academy would come to take them away. "I never thought I'd see this day," Henrietta said, looking at the crates. "My work going to London, being seen, being studied." "You deserve it," Victoria said. "You worked so hard for so many years." "We worked," Henrietta corrected her. "I couldn't have done this without you. You brought order to my chaos." That night, a letter came from Alexander. He would come in 3 days to take Victoria to Vienna, if she was still willing. They would be married there, in a small church he knew, with just a few friends as witnesses. "Not like your first wedding, I expect," Henrietta said when Victoria told her. Victoria thought back to her wedding to Thomas. 500 guests in a big London church. Her dress had cost more than a farmer made in a year. Everyone who mattered had been there to see, but it had felt empty somehow, like a show put on for others, not a true joining of hearts. "No," Victoria agreed, "not like that at all, and I'm glad." The next morning the men from the academy came for the crates. They treated Henrietta with great respect, calling her the noted naturalist and asking her questions about her work. Henrietta stood tall and proud, explaining her specimens with clear, sure words. When the last crate was loaded onto their wagon, the head of the group presented Henrietta with a letter. "From the Academy Board, Miss Wyndham. They wish to offer you a position as a special advisor, with a yearly payment for your services." Henrietta's hands shook as she took the letter. "A position? For me? At my age?" "Yes, ma'am. Your knowledge is valuable. The Academy recognizes that now." After the men left, Henrietta sat by the fire, reading the letter over and over. "I never thought I'd see the day," she said softly. "All those years, working alone, thinking no one cared." "They care now," Victoria said, putting her hand on the old woman's shoulder. "Your work will help others learn. It will live on after you." 3 days later, Alexander came as promised. His carriage waited on the road while he walked to the cottage. Victoria watched him from the window, her heart beating fast. He looked so tall and sure, walking up the path with long steps. "Are you ready?" Henrietta asked, coming to stand beside her. "I think so," Victoria said, "but I'll miss you." "I'll be fine," Henrietta said. "I have my work, and now, thanks to you, I have the respect of the Academy, and a bit of money to keep me comfortable. You'll write to me every week, and you'll visit when you can." The Duke knocked on the door. Victoria opened it, and there he was, smiling at her with those kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. "Hello," he said softly. "Hello," she replied, suddenly shy. "Miss Wyndham," the Duke said, bowing to Henrietta. "Thank you for sharing your niece with me." Henrietta snorted. "She's not mine to share. She's her own person." "Indeed she is," Alexander agreed. "That's why I love her." Victoria's small bag was already packed. Just a few clothes, a book Henrietta had given her, and the shell Alexander had found on the beach that day. The one he had said was beautiful, like her. "I'm ready," she said. Alexander took her bag in one hand and offered his other arm to her. They walked down the path together, with Henrietta following. At the bottom of the path, the Duke's driver waited with the carriage. "Vienna first," Alexander said as they stood by the carriage, "for our wedding. Then wherever you wish to go, Paris to see the museums, Rome for the ancient ruins, or perhaps north to the fjords." "Wherever there's a coast to study," Victoria said. "I still have much to learn." "We'll learn together," he promised. They said goodbye to Henrietta at the carriage. The old woman hugged Victoria tight. "Be happy," she whispered. "Be yourself. Don't let anyone make you small again." "I won't," Victoria promised. "Never again." The wedding was just as Alexander had described. Small, quiet, perfect. They stood in a tiny church in Vienna, saying simple vows to love and honour each other. Victoria wore a dress of deep blue, like the sea on a clear day. Alexander wore a simple black suit, with a blue flower in his coat to match her dress. No one from London was there. No one who had known Victoria as Lady Blackwood. The few guests were Alexander's friends, scholars and scientists who treated Victoria with respect when they learned of her work with Henrietta. After the ceremony, they went to Alexander's house, their house now, on a quiet street near the river. It was big but not too fancy. Books filled the shelves, maps covered the walls. It felt like a place where people lived and worked and thought, not just a showplace for wealth. "Welcome home," Alexander said, leading her inside. That night, as they sat by the fire in their new home, Alexander gave her a gift. It was a book, a beautiful book with drawings of sea creatures on the cover. "Open it," he said. Victoria opened the book. Inside, the title page read, "Marine Life of the English Coast" by Henrietta Wyndham and Victoria Smith. "But how?" Victoria asked, running her fingers over the words. "Henrietta's book wasn't finished." "I had it finished," Alexander explained. "From her notes and yours. A small publisher here in Vienna printed it. It's the first of many, I hope. The next can be about the coast we visit together." Victoria felt tears in her eyes. Happy tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "This means more than I can say." 6 months later, Victoria stood on the deck of a small boat off the coast of Greece. The sun was hot on her skin. The wind blew her hair, which she now wore loose down her back. In her hands, she held a net for catching small sea creatures. Alexander stood beside her, looking through a spyglass at a bird on a distant rock. His face was tanned from months at sea. He looked happy and strong. "Look," he said, handing her the spyglass. "I think it's a rare type of gull. The one we read about in that Greek naturalist book." Victoria looked through the glass. The bird was white with black-tipped wings and a red spot on its beak. "You're right," she said excitedly. "Let me get my drawing book." As she sketched the bird, Victoria thought about how much her life had changed. A year and a half ago, she'd been Lady Victoria Blackwood, the perfect wife, hollow inside. Now she was the Duchess of Northbridge, but more importantly, she was Victoria, naturalist, artist, student of the sea, and she was full inside, full of love, full of purpose, full of herself. Later, as the small boat headed back to the harbour, Alexander wrapped his arm around her waist. "Happy?" he asked. "Very," she said, leaning against him. "I never knew life could be like this." "Like what?" "So free, so real." "So," she looked for the right word, "so much mine." Alexander smiled and kissed the top of her head. "That's what I wanted for you, a life that's yours, not anyone else's idea of what you should be." As they neared the harbour, Victoria saw a ship flying a British flag. For a moment she thought of London, of the parties and the gossip, of Thomas and his young wife, of the life she had once thought was all she could hope for. But the thought didn't bring pain anymore, or regret. That life was like a dress she had outgrown and put away. It didn't fit her anymore. This life, with sea air in her lungs, knowledge in her mind, love in her heart, and purpose in her days, this was the life that fit her now. The life she had chosen, the life she had built from the broken pieces of her old one. "Look," Alexander said, pointing to a splash in the water near their boat. "Dolphins!" Victoria laughed as the sleek grey shapes leaped and played around the boat. They seemed so joyful, so perfectly themselves, just as she was now, just as she would always be. "Thank you," she said to Alexander, though the words seemed too small for what she felt. "For what?" he asked. "For seeing me," she said, "the real me, even when I couldn't see myself." He smiled and took her hand. "That's what love is," he said simply, "seeing the truth of someone and cherishing what you see." As the boat docked in the small Greek harbour, Victoria thought again of that night at Rosewood Hall when her world had fallen apart. That night that had seemed like the end of everything. But it hadn't been an end. It had been a beginning, the beginning of her true life, her real self. And for that, strangely enough, she was grateful.